full of changes. Now is the time to move on. This is the time for solutions. Feel the motion. Be new is born. Being in all of you. Now I'm connected to you. Being in all of you. Be new will do it for you. This is the time for solutions. Be new is for you.
Menudo viernes estamos teniendo aquí en BGREEN Mobility. Estamos en Casa SEAT, en Barcelona, en el centro de la ciudad condal, en su corazón. Y aquí hoy, vamos, el corazón nos late más que nunca y a una velocidad de vértigo. Porque, claro, cuando miramos hacia ese futuro de la movilidad sostenible, de la movilidad que resuelve los problemas también de las ciudades y de los usuarios de esa movilidad, pensamos que todo esto hay que regularlo, hay que ordenarlo. Y esta mañana aquí vamos. Estamos en ebullición. En el siguiente panel vamos a hablar del Green Deal. Seguro que os suena. El Green Deal europeo exige, atención, la reducción del 90% de las emisiones de gases de efecto invernadero procedentes del transporte. Lo que requiere, pues eso, importantes inversiones en infraestructuras y en flotas de este transporte. Convertirse en una economía climáticamente neutra para 2050, que insisto, que parece que esté muy lejos, pero no, solo puede conseguirse pues aumentando la sostenibilidad en este sector tan estratégico y tan vital ahora mismo que es el del transporte. En este panel analizaremos cómo puede la Unión Europea determinar la importancia tanto a nivel económico como social de un transporte sostenible en la evaluación de los planes nacionales de recuperación y resiliencia. Dirigiendo este panel, aquí a mi lado está Ana Escoda, que es responsable del área de proyectos y cooperación internacional de ASCAME, encargada de gestionar y ejecutar proyectos e iniciativas basadas en la economía azul, economía verde, transformación digital también, brindando respuestas efectivas a esos desafíos y oportunidades que tienen que afrontar pues, las cámaras de comercio y las pymes, y promoviendo también la integración económica del Mediterráneo y la Asociación Euro-Mediterránea a través del papel clave que tiene el sector privado. Ana Escoda, bienvenida a BGREEN Mobility.
Muchas gracias, Clara.
¿Preparada para este panel que se presenta?
Interesante.
Hace así como interesante, sí. Vamos a ello.
Y con contenido, muchas
gracias.
Adelante,
Ana, yo confío plenamente en ti. Hasta ahora.
Perfecto, muchas gracias. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here with all of you, with all the audience. It's a great pleasure also to share this time with all of you, with these high-level speakers that we will have here today in this BGREEN panel. First of all, I'm going to introduce you the speakers and also the topics of the session of today's BGREEN panel. First of all, we will have the pleasure to have the presentation of the Secretary General of the Unions of African, Egyptian, and Euro-Mediterranean Chambers, Dr. Ala Es, sharing with all the audience the importance of the transport sector technologies and also presenting pilot success stories, among others. Good morning, Dr. Ala. Secondly, thanks to the change cultivator and promoting also the 5 Ps, ecological and thrivability, we will have the pleasure to have the contributions of Mr. Joris Claes. We will enrich our conception about how digitalization and also transformation can help us to overcome the barriers and challenges we face today in this first last mile logistics, among also other topics. Good morning, Mr. Joris. Thank you for being here with all of us today. And then, thirdly, we will have Mrs. Alejandra Cruz, who is the transport specialist of the International Labour Organization. And we will have the opportunity to talk about such interesting topics as actions related to green jobs, just transition, and circular economy. Therefore, starting with this BGREEN panel, please, Dr. Ala Es, could you please explain us a bit about if there is enough funding to stress the objectives of the Green Deal? Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, Anna. Good morning, dear friends. Good morning, audience. I wish I would have been in Barcelona maybe for the 70th time to be with you physically, but hopefully very soon during the economic week we'll all be together in Barcelona. Answering your question, yes and no. Yes, because there is a lot of funding. There is over 22 billion euros of grants, soft loans, and technical assistance availed for the private sector in the Southern Mediterranean. They're not geared only towards mobility, but mobility is eligible to utilize them. And we conduct on annual basis such a survey. This is done by Ascami, BusinessMed, and SIBA, where we try to mediate to companies as well as BSOs what is available so they can utilize it. On the other hand, several countries in the Mediterranean, the governments are availing specific funding, whether buyback agreements for old cars, whether reduced interest rates, preferential interest rates for different types of mobility upgrading and modernization. And last but not least, the two big initiatives, the European Union External Investment Plan and the Green Deal.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Ala. And can you please give us some kind of examples or success stories that it can be like replicated regionally also?
Maybe I have to start mentioning that we as business community, though we have our belief in saving our environment, but we more important look at environmental pollution simply that it's our money that we pay for raw materials that because of bad technologies, bad management, loss of eco-efficiency technologies, we lose part of it into the air, water, and soil. So the perspective here is a little bit different. And this, from that perspective, when we talk about mobility, one of the key success stories that has been implemented, I'll use my country, Egypt, was rationalization of energy subsidies. We were subsidizing all fossil fuels as well as electricity, which was very simply a very good reason not to comply, not to upgrade, and not to look at energy waste and energy pollution as an issue whatsoever. So one of the successes, which was a very social and political issue, was removing that energy subsidy. And then this was followed by major reforms. For example, 3 years ago, we just started our feed-in tariff, which meant that private sector can go into PPPs with the government in producing electricity. And in less than 3 years, we have the biggest solar farm in the world in Bamban. The same can be applied to different sides of mobility. Also, success stories that we do have is in the fintech sector, where we have, like the world has Uber and Careem going on all around, reducing the amount of time, wasted time that vehicles are moving. We started in transport, having a new fintech called Trella, which was actually out of our EU incubator that was implemented with Ascami. And this reduced trucks moving empty all around the country down to around 70% full, which was a huge success story. The same we have for people's transport using new apps like Swivel. So, and these are growing not only in Egypt, they're growing in the Mediterranean, in the MENA region, in Africa, as well as starting to go into Europe. Also, one of the success stories that we're fighting at the moment to replicate, which is the EU Motorways of the Sea, which we should apply in the Southern Mediterranean, moving land transport, which is highly polluting and non-efficient to a greater extent, to the sea and rivers, same like the EU has done. And we're working with the European Commission trying to replicate such a success story. And naturally, our cross-border cooperation projects, as well as EPSOMED regional project, they're all having a huge component geared towards BGREEN as well as green mobility.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ala, to highlight also the importance of these new technologies, and also well, related to the transport sector, and also to the EU good practices and the transferability that that we can offer to other countries. Okay, thank you very much. Now moving to Mr. Joris Claes. Well, first last mile logistics is among the most complex and expensive parts of the supply chain, and disrupts people in cities and urban areas with pollutive transport equipment. Why is this, and what can be done about it?
Thank you, Anna.
Thank you.
Well, the topic of green mobility and how the European Union and all parties involved are dealing with it is a huge topic. So I had to make some choices on what I bring, otherwise I can talk here for days probably. But so the topic, and if I relate it to first last mile logistics, it's a situation which was being reported by Gartner and Progress 44 recently. They surfaced alarming highlights relative to the situation, a problematic situation actually. And this is all due to, one is the growth of e-commerce, but also the fact that the first and last mile logistics are too much connected with the maritime and port activities. That results in actually a disconnect digitally and physically from long distance transportation all the way to cities and urban areas, where governments have to deal with all the traffic enhancements, but also the pollution. And at the same time, the clients in the e-commerce sector are not happy with the delays of deliveries. Although we want, of course, we order today and even the same day, or at least the next day, it should be arriving at our doorstep. And that's probably also a mentality change we have to establish. But looking at purely the transportation sector, the only way to get through the chaos is to decomplexify it, and the only way to do that is by disconnecting the urban and city logistics of cargo from the long distance transportation, and in the wider perspective, the global supply chains. And that is only a temporary situation, because everybody is inventing and working with their own standards. And that leads to enormous chaos, complexity, lots of manipulation, whether it is transshipment, storage, handling, name it. And that goes all the way from the long distance transportation, the larger distribution centers, into city hubs, which are only recently being developed in many major cities. And then the actual deliveries, whether that is with bikes, trikes, little vans, and so on. We still see lots of large trucks, even containers, going into the cities. And that is what has to be taken out. And the only way we see that is possible, and we are working on a number of solutions for that, is to disconnect and to focus not on the vehicles itself, but on the cargo and the box, what we call that, or what we call pods. If you do that, you can focus on how to handle the first and last mile logistics in the urban and city areas, as well as from the large DCs and the warehouse and the ports all the way down to the hinterland. We also know that many cities and villages and urban areas are starting to ban larger trucks, units, and rigid trucks and vans into their cities. So it is essential that we understand that, and therefore we need to shift the focus from the vehicle to the actual cargo and what we call the modular box-in-box. And that will, if we do that, that will minimize multiple transshipments, storage and repackaging, and really optimize and synchronize the first and last mile logistics.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joris Claes. And how digitalization and transformation can help us to overcome the barriers and the challenges that we are facing today in the first last mile logistics? I think that we are facing some technical problems. Just give us a second.
Can you hear me?
Yes, now we hear you properly. Thank you.
The micro went out for some reason. Anyway, in many European projects, whether they are funded or supported by some of the European programs, we see that the focus is on the vehicle. And that is all right, because there is a lot of work to be done as well. But if you twist that towards the cargo and the actual box, so not a container, but a box-in-box modular system, then you will not only looking at digitalizing the packaging of the cargo, but also the connectivity of that box with all the rest of the supply chain and all the actors involved. And that's what we call the physical internet, or the connectivity both digitally and physically of the cargo and the box. So on the other side, it's all right to do electrification and using renewable energy for the vehicles. Also, those need solutions on how long they can be on the road before they have to recharge. Also, the solutions being developed today are considering that. So batteries are becoming part of the box. And because it has its all connectivity features, it also has solar panels, for example, which can charge these batteries, and everything becomes independently and can also be run autonomous. So not only the vehicle, but the box itself as well, and handling the cargo. So if you think from a modular perspective, you're going to start seeing the holistic approach this can take. And that will create the physical internet, and together with all the intelligent transportation solutions, you come to potentials to incentivize the actors in the supply chain, and these can be the logistics providers, couriers, name it, but also the shippers, to incentivize them to opt for zero emissions instead of ICE-driven transport. So there is a huge potential there. Once you are looking at that, then you have to ensure that you link back in a standardized and digitalized way to link it back to the global supply chains, the long distance transportation, and the maritime sector even. So you can only do that if you first disconnect, standardize it, digitalize it in a proper way, and then also with intelligent transportation solutions, you're going to see how we can offset carbon emissions, and what we call in the terms also in Europe is ecological consciousness by everybody involved. And that will reassure that the entire supply chains from global to local and local to global gets better synchronized, that there is interoperability, and that we see that large vans and containers don't need to leave, let's say, the extended port area, which will also have lots of benefits for the maritime sector and the ports. So from that perspective, you're going to see how we can make optimal use of the equipment, both the boxes and the vehicles, which are suitable for entering in cities, whether that are trikes, bikes, smaller autonomous vans, and so on. In China, we see the evolution with Alibaba going on. They are at stage to go live after done about a year and a half piloting with autonomous vehicles who can deliver home packages. They have done that in university campuses, but they are now ready to go to live city and urban area environments where they will deploy, starting with 10,000 of these autonomous vehicles And it will even go further. In the coming years, they expect by 2025 to have about 50 to 100,000 of these vehicles all over the place in the city and urban areas. Those are only looking at the vehicle. So we are looking at the modular box and how we have to synchronize data, and together with that, as part of it, the physical internet to realize all of that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Joris Claes, for these great inputs. Now I would like to move to Mrs. Alejandra Cruz. Hello, good morning. What is the International Labour Organization doing in terms of green jobs, just transition and circular economy?
Thank you, Anna. Good morning, everyone. Greetings from Geneva. I think that before I will start by describing very shortly who the ILO is, but because perhaps some of the audience might not be familiar with its work. So we're the International Labour Organization. We represent 187 member states. And basically, we promote jobs and we protect people. So I'm going to speak and focus my interventions mostly on the social part of sustainability and greening. We are an international regulatory agency that was born from the ashes of World War I in 1919. And our founding principle is that universal lasting peace can only be established if it is based on social justice. And we bring together the representatives of not only governments, but also workers and employers. So our mandate is the world of work, and we carry out and promote our mandate through the decent work agenda that has 4 pillars: employment creation, social security and social protection, social dialogue and collective bargaining, and international standards and fundamental principles and rights at work. And one of our cross-cutting policy drivers, well, they include gender equality, non-discrimination, but also just transition and environmental sustainability. And well, we're here talking about the Green Deal, so probably you're wondering how we integrate this decent work agenda into issues of green jobs, just transition, circular economy from the bigger perspective, and then from the sectoral perspective into the transport sector. As for the green jobs, well, basically, green jobs are connected with sustainable development, people well-being, and healthy organizations and enterprises. And since 2013, the ILO already adopted conclusions on green jobs, and it later adopted guidelines for a just transition towards environmentally sustainable economies and societies for all. These were adopted by the governing body in November 2015. Also in 2019, the ILO adopted and issued a report on skills for a greener future. We define green jobs as decent jobs that contribute to preserve and restore the environment, be they in traditional sectors such as manufacturing and construction, or in new and emerging green sectors such as renewable energy and energy efficiency. Now, with regards to our work in circular economy, the ILO believes taking a human-centered approach. And we can ensure that with the circular economy, we create a win-win situation that is urgently needed for the planet prosperity and its people and jobs. So we redouble our efforts to make a circular economy inclusive and one that works for everyone. And we believe at the ILO that it has the potential to generate a new generation of sustainable enterprises and to create green and decent jobs that we urgently need. Actually, the ILO research shows that there might be a net gain of 7 million jobs worldwide by 2030 if we follow these principles. But if we don't manage the transition properly and the recovery properly from COVID-19, we're risking recycling inequalities and decent work deficits that exist in the circular economy today. So the solution rests on a serious commitment from the ministries of labor, from employers, workers, organizations across the globe. And in this sense, the ILO is already working with an association called PACE to develop and implement projects that help bring a just transition into some sectors, including textiles, electronics, and plastics. And finally, I wanted to touch upon the guidelines for a just transition, which are basically our roadmap that the ILO offers to regulators. No, these guidelines were adopted following conclusions adopted in 2013, and in 2015 there was a meeting of experts, and the guidelines allow for practical country-level application and are based on evidence and lessons learned from a country-level perspectives and sectoral strategies geared towards environmental sustainability and the greening of enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Alejandra Cruz. And can you explain us a bit more about how the International Labour Organization worked to connect with the transport sector and also social justice?
Yes. Well, there are three main products connecting this green agenda to the transport sector from a research and regulatory approach. So first, I will mention a study that was carried out by a colleague of mine, Catherine Saget, at the research department. And then I will mention two regulatory tools that we have that promote greening of the sector. The first, well, the study, it's a new study on jobs in green and healthy transport, making the green shift. It was done in conjunction with our sister agency, the UNECE, and the PEP program that they manage. And it basically documents the case that a structural transformation of the transport sector will be needed if environmentally sustainable green economies are to become a reality. The study finds that this leads to a creation of millions of jobs. Actually, 10 million additional jobs could be created in the transport sector at the UNECE, in the UNECE region. So 2.9 million in the UNECE region if 50% of all vehicles are manufactured with electric technology. And in addition, almost 5 million new jobs at the worldwide level. This if the UNECE countries double investment in public transport. So the report examines the employment implication of 4 greening transport scenarios in 56 countries, and it compares a business as usual approach with a scenario-based projections that run up to 2030. And these options envisage an accelerated expansion of public transport and the electrification of private passenger and freight transport. Other factors that the report finds that could support job creation outside of transport includes increased spending on goods and services, resulting from a reduction in spending on oil and measures related to the production and use of energy. And the electrification of private passenger and freight transport could also create jobs, particularly in the electricity and renewable resources sector. The two regulatory tools I'm going to discuss now are first the ILO guidelines on the promotion of decent work and road safety in the transport sector. These international guidance and regulatory principles were adopted in 2019 through a meeting of experts. And it's a document that includes 190 paragraphs, and 4 of its paragraphs discuss the greening of jobs and environment and climate change. So first, it mentions that the greening of jobs and their promotion will foster a competitive, low-carbon, environmentally sustainable economy and will contribute to the fight against climate change. So there's first an acknowledgement from the regulators, and then it mentions on actions that governments, social partners, and transport chain parties should consider, for example, in establishing national policies or action programs. So 1 is formalization, 2 is skills development, the framework for professionalization, 3, measures to green the transport, including fleet renewal, eco-driving training, so that's where money should be spent. Then in terms of the policies and incentives to curb greenhouse gases, the document basically acknowledged that there is room for improvement in the effective organization of loads, and to minimize empty seats and empty runs. So here I could really relate to the example provided by Dr. Ez that mentioned that, earlier how this empty hauling and the tools they had been providing to reduce empty hauling up to 70%. So that's exactly what we're talking. This is more at the regulatory principle. He was talking more from a boots on the ground, how we did it, The development of skills and training drivers. So there are several projects that can be implemented to promote eco-driving amongst the mobile workers. No, the development of green technology, of course, and then finally the document in one of its paragraphs mentioned. Well, the inclusion of the guidelines I was mentioning earlier for a just transition. Now, in the case of urban passenger transport, we recently had a technical meeting that adopted conclusions and also regulatory text and guidance. And basically, well, almost half of the document is about facilitating transition to formality and a just transition to decent and sustainable work. The meeting was about the future of decent and sustainable work in urban transport services. And it stresses three key points. One, that decurbanization efforts should be guided by just transition principles, like as established in the ILO guidelines, no? Two, that social dialogue is a strong driver, no, for economic and social resilience, and to reconcile competition, technological innovation, equitable access, decent work, and environmental principles, no, and to create level playing fields. And thirdly, that sustainable investments and responsible procurement and contracting practices should focus on the quality of service, applying to all public and private contractors and subcontractors in UPT, in urban passenger transport. So, and that this can contribute to the just transition and promotion of decent work in the sector. So I'll stop at that, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the interesting content is being discussed in today's session. Now, following the structure of the session, let's move to the Q&A section. We have some questions for you, and if some of you want to complete the answer, please feel free to add more content if you feel that you have to. Okay. First of all, we have a question for Dr. Alaez. The Green Deal, it can be adapted to each country, or are there the same producers for all of them? And please, if you can give us some examples.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, Green Deal is the same like lots of mega initiatives of the European Union that are addressing more than one country, more than one region, and for a very long period. And here you cannot offer coffee to all. Maybe my dear friend Joris and Alessandra has to a bit touched upon this. Joris was focusing on the vehicle, on the cargo rather than the vehicle, because he comes from the EU where you have Euro 5 plus types of vehicles, where we in the Southern Mediterranean, we still have ancient World War II vehicles running in the streets, consuming huge amounts of fossil fuels, inducing huge amount of pollution. And if we talk about vehicle inspection, it's not the solution. The solution is to replace first this fleet. Then we go to the second step, we mature and we go into working on the cargo, working on logistic hubs, working on reducing the transshipment, and working in parallel on human resources that Alejandra has been touching upon. So here, such an initiative should not be rigid, should not offer the same to everybody. It should offer what is needed on the ground in every country and region, depending on their present status of today. So also another thing is such an initiative should be supported by a huge amount of technical assistance, especially in the advocacy side. I think Alejandra will love hearing the word advocacy because this is what ILO is doing day and night, but we're doing the same. We are the same side, or let's say the two sides of the same coin. We want to reach sustainable development, we want to reach eco-efficiency, and we're working on parallel streams trying to get this done. There is a lot of reforms that need to be done, and the Green Deal alone as a pot of money supporting initiatives is not enough. It has to have technical assistance, supporting advocacy, transferring success stories in regulatory reform within the European Union to their neighboring countries. I hope I've covered the way you were asking.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Ala. In fact, we have another question it's a bit related to your answer, Dr. Ala, for Mr. Joris Claes, about what collaborative roles can cities, national or other governments, authorities can play in the private sector in order to overcome the challenges that we are facing?
Well, first of all, like we are having here a dialogue between different organizations, whether we are public associations or the governmental sector. That is what needs to happen on a very broad level. And only by bringing all these parties together, so the city governments, national governments, and then the actors, or they are courier services, city hubs, large distribution centers, if they come together and they begin the dialogue so that they can understand the challenges they are having in front of them, because it is really chaos in the first and last mile logistics at this moment. So that is the only way where you can start. And there is good dialogue busy, but you have to be patient. Some technologies, and Dr. Is has mentioned that there is need for that as well. But some of these technologies are still under development. They cannot immediately be widespread, disseminated across cities, countries, and so on. So there is still a lot of innovation going on, and those projects are being promoted. They are funded, financed by the financial institutions. That's all great stuff. But it is also a matter of people talking with each other and understand the problems and the challenges they are facing. And if they do that, they will understand and recognize and how to optimize the different challenges or find solutions. And that is not only by innovative electrification or digitalizations. Sometimes it is about just very solutions which are just around the corner. And if we talk about them, they're going to surface automatically. So, and then technology and innovations can come hand in hand and very handy as well. So, but while city and urban logistics have only been focusing on the electrification of vehicles, as I mentioned earlier, we are switching this towards the box and the cargo. And we are also making clear to whether they are government, local or national government authorities, that they have to bring in the perspective that it is essential that the entire sector and everybody involved thinks in a more circular way, a more regenerative design in the materials being used for these boxes and the packaging materials, that manufacturers and shippers, that they ensure they are focusing on extending the life cycle of their products rather than pushing for the consumer behavior we have developed in the last 10, 20 years. That has to stop, actually. And the only way to stop that is to talk about it and see what can we do about this. So it's not only government and the actors involved in the supply chains, but also the very end customer. So you and I and everybody else who have to think about what are we doing, and that is affecting very negatively our planet, nature. So if we think about it consciously, we're gonna realize much more climate change effects than what we are doing today.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Joris Claes. Dr. Ala, you would like to add something to this answer?
Yes, I'm just rephrasing what Joris just said, because this is our dream, all of us, is to come back to the pre-COVID life. Simply what you were saying is we had pre-panel, post-panel, coffee breaks, dinners, where we really discuss issues. It's not only like we're doing right now for 1 hour, but we had whole days of really exchanging experiences, coming back home with issues that we can really implement. And we hope that in November during the Barcelona Economic Week, we will be able to do that again, and hopefully in the years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we have another question. How do we change the consumer behavior relative to the growth of the e-commerce to improve the situation between long-distance transportation and first last-mile logistics in cities and also in urban areas? It's a question for you, Mr. Joris.
Okay. Well, I want to first pick up on what Dr. Is mentioned. We don't want to bring home issues, we want to bring home the solutions, of course. The other thing is, we don't want to go back to the old normal or the previous COVID situations. We want to actually reinvent the way we think, the way we consume, the way we live, and only then we're going to make changes and adapt to climate change. If we're going to go back to pre-COVID situations, then we're going to see what we have done in the financial crisis of 2008 and 9. The 10 years after that, it's like we haven't learned our lessons. We have actually made things worse. So that should never happen again. And we really have to reinvent each of us ourselves and making sure that we adapt. And all these little things of changes we can do personally and individually, that and in family environment or with friends, within your company you are working, and so on. All these little changes, they will realize the effects we are looking for within the European Green Deal. So the consumer behavior, for example, needs to change the way we are doing. And what I've seen recently in the last couple of months is that everybody starts buying again. Politicians are telling and actually promoting that we should bring the economy back to speed by actually enhancing the consumption again. That is not a solution. We have to think long term for our children, for our grandchildren, and that they will still have the benefits of this planet we have. And we are living this planet to its outermost potentials if we continue to do so. And then there will be no planet for our grandchildren and their children and so on. So we have to think about, if we are serious about the European Green Deal, 55% reduction in GHG emissions, and there is much more than GHG emissions to be done by 2030, and by 2050 being zero emission economy, then lots of changes have to be done. And that's not only by developing technologies, yes, that will help, but it's also about changing the mindset amongst everybody. So yeah, that is my input and proposal to everybody, and that everybody's taking their responsibility to make that happen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Joris Claes. We have a last question to Mrs. Alejandra Cruz. In terms of the International Labour Organization, what are the next steps that can be taken to become a climate neutral economy in the near future? What can we do?
Thank you, Anna. Well, as mentioned before, the ILO puts out there its documents, its regulatory tools, its international standards to serve our constituents in shaping these policies and programs, that later trickle down. So, well, first and foremost, I was mentioning the ILO guidelines on just transition, but more recently, there are a couple of other roadmaps that have been adopted. So in 2019, with the ILO to mark its 100 years of existence, the ILO adopted the Centenary Declaration for the Future of Work in 2019, and it focuses on the world of work and how it's experiencing transformative changes and these mega trends driven by technological innovation, demographic shifts, climate change, and globalization. Another roadmap that we adopted more recently, and as a result of the pandemic, was the global call to action outlining measures to create a human-centered recovery from the pandemic and to avoid long-term scarring of economies and societies. So it commits countries to ensuring that their economy and social recovery is fully inclusive, sustainable, and resilient. And the agreement includes 2 sets of agreed actions. First, it covers measures to be taken by national governments and their employer and trade union social partners to achieve a job-rich recovery. And a second set of actions covers international cooperation, the role of multilateral institutions, including the ILO, and how to increase the coherence to support national human-centered recovery strategies. Also, at the sectoral level, we issued 20 sectoral briefs that include guidance on COVID-19 pandemic recovery, including the port sectors, shipping and maritime sectors, road transport, urban transport, and civil aviation. Now, at the sectoral level, and with regards to the other 2 documents I was mentioning in urban transport services and road transport, well, we will continue disseminating our work and taking it at the global level and in the next biennia to come, because these are regulatory principles that were adopted for the years to come in those sectors. And as already stressed, we will be disseminating and advocating this information in as many forums as we can. And one thing that really stayed with me that Joris mentioned was the bringing together of all parties, because it's a point that is highlighted in both of these documents. Whether in the road transport sector, it's not only bringing together social partners and governments, but also all the chains of the transport party, be it shippers, receivers, freight forwarders. I think it's important to acknowledge that subcontracting is endemic to the sector, and that it is also the role played by all the parties that participate, whether in services or employment contracts, that will lead, to a greener future. And also the urban transport services conclusions highlight the fact that, well, yes, there is subcontracting or concessioning and different forms of subcontracting going on, but also the fact that all parties need to be brought together to the table, be it national governments, state or municipalities. So this bringing together of all parties, including through social dialogue, I think is one of the fundamental steps, that will help us, in shaping greener policies, deals, in the future at the regional or national level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Alejandra Cruz. Thank you very much for these key and valuable contributions today. I give back the floor to Clara to end the session, and it was a great pleasure to spend the time with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ana.
Thank you, Ana.
Thank you.
Bueno, qué intensidad.
Sí.
Estaba allí tomando notas. Ese objetivo que tenemos, ese objetivo Green Deal, ¿no? Que tiene como 2 etapas, la del 2030 y la del 2050, cuando ya pues nos planteamos esa economía con 0 emisiones, esa economía neutra que de momento es el gran objetivo, es una utopía, pero hay mucho trabajo por hacer. Primero, nos pedían paciencia, porque hay que combinar aquí pues muchas administraciones, muchos intereses, tiene muchas capas. Este Green Deal tiene muchas capas y de entrada nos pedían los expertos, dicen que sí con la cabeza, paciencia. ¿Qué más me he apuntado? No es posible el café para todos, no es posible. ¿Por qué? Porque el Green Deal, nos decían, debe adaptarse a cada país. De hecho, lo hemos visto esta mañana cuando hablábamos también de regulación. Es importante la personalidad de cada país, las necesidades que tiene y luego pues plantearnos ese futuro tan necesario. ¿Qué más? Se ha hablado aquí de como una cadena de 3 que suma, ¿no? Ese Internet fiscal o conectividad de la carga, cuando hablábamos de esa logística de la última y la primera milla, ¿no? Que tanto congestiona las ciudades. Es importante este Internet fiscal o conectividad de la carga, más estandarizar los procesos, más esta interoperatividad que también nos suena mucho de toda esta semana aquí en BGREEN Mobility. Más cosas, tengo aquí, lo tengo por números, no os penséis que tengo muchas cosas apuntadas. En cuanto a los trabajadores, nos pedía Alejandra desde la OIT este trabajo centrado en el ser humano que merece un trabajo decente, un trabajo digno y sobre todo más sostenibilidad en el sector del transporte, ¿no? Este sector al que le pedimos mucho, al que vemos muy cerca este 2030 y en el que, como nos comentaban, por ejemplo, en el sur de Europa todavía hay flotas de transporte que contaminan muchísimo. Bueno, al final pedimos una transición también más justa para este sector del transporte. Bueno, cuántas cosas y más que van a venir aquí en BGREEN Mobility. Ahora tenemos una charla inspiracional para relajarnos un poquito de Ed Gillespie, un emprendedor medioambiental que nos propone reinventar las ciudades a partir del pulso creativo de la ciudadanía. Qué interesante, aquí en unos minutos.